Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session to learn more about your workers' comp premium. I'm Vivek Kumar of Team Force AI, and we're honored today to host Alok and Angela. Alok brings a number of years of safety expertise that he'll be telling you about momentarily. And Angela comes from the Workers' Compensation um, Insurance Rating Bureau, which is based in California, but can provide insights to everyone across the country, at least from her knowledge and learnings. Team Force AI is an enterprise software as a solution company that helps organizations create a system of proof around various types of things that workers are seeing on the shop floor. In essence, to help reduce safety incidents, quality gaps, process risks, and more. Alok, would love to introduce yourself and kind of take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Alok Maheshwari with KDD Safety. With over 25 years of experience in safety and construction, manufacturing, utilities, consulting with Caterpillar Safety Services and DuPont Sustainable Solutions. I started my own company that specializes in helping companies get from good to great. And by focusing on the culture of the company via leadership, accountability, communication, and teamwork. Appreciate this opportunity, Vivek. Angela, I'll turn it over to you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Angela Sundin. I work for the WCIRB, the Workers' Comp Insurance Rating Bureau. I'm a senior classification business analyst in our data analytics department. I primarily work on classification studies, but I also do educational things like this. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get things going. Can everybody see my screen okay? So just to give a little bit of background about myself, I've been working for the WCIRB for about 11 years. I've worked in various departments, including the field that included classification inspections and audits. I've also had a lot of experience with experience modifications, and I've done a lot of trainings. So this is definitely within my wheelhouse. Just a kind of a quick agenda. We'll be going through quickly who the WCRB is, and then we'll get into what exactly is experience rating, which is connected to experience modifications, also known as XMODs. And then I'll provide some information on experience modifications and then also about losses specifically. So before we get into it, I'm just going to go through kind of who the WCIRB is. So WCIRB stands for Workers' Comp Insurance Rating Bureau of California. We are an unincorporated private nonprofit association comprised of all companies licensed to transact workers' comp insurance in California. And we have over 400 member companies. Essentially, we are a data organization that specializes in California workers' comp insurance. We're the only organization of this kind in California. And insurers who write California workers' policies are required to report their data for their California policies to us. We exist to objectively provide actuarial-based information and research and something called advisory pure premium rates, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide, as well as educational services. And we do this in order to maintain a healthy workers' comp system. So I'm sure that all sounds really great, but what exactly does that entail? So what do we do on a day-to-day basis? First off, like I said, insurers submit their California workers' comp data to us. So we collect that data, which includes payroll and loss information for every California workers' comp policy. I'm emphasizing California because we just work for the California workers' comp ecosystem. We also administer something called the standard classification system. And I'm sure some of the people on the line have probably heard of that term classification before, but it's how we group distinct and identifiable occupations, industries, and businesses. We have about 700 classifications in California. Each of those classifications has an associated advisory pure premium rate. So that's the rate that insurers can use to establish their own rates, and it reflects expected losses and other expenses on a statewide basis for each classification. So insurers have access to their own workers' comp data, of course, but these rates reflect statewide data for each classification. We also administer the Insurance Commissioner's regulations, which include the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan, or USRP, and the Experience Rating Plan, or ERP. So those plans include rules for the reporting of policy information and the procedure for experience rating. The WCIRB uses the rules for experience rating to calculate and publish experience modifications, which is what I'll be talking about today. And the last thing that we do is we provide outreach and education to stakeholders in the workers' comp system. So I'll get into it. What is experience rating? Let me start with an introduction about that. So experience rating is something called a merit rating system. Let me kind of break down both of those words because I don't know that it's always clear. Merit essentially means your performance, and rating means your grade. So it's essentially your grade based on your workers' comp performance. And when we talk about workers' comp performance, this is really talking about workers' comp accidents or claims. So the purpose of experience rating is really to provide employers with a financial incentive to reduce their work-related accidents. Secondly, the purpose of experience rating is really to distribute the cost of workers' comp insurance more equitably among employers within a specific industry. So instead of employers in the same industry and of the same size paying the same premium for workers' comp insurance, experience rating exists to distribute the cost more equitably based on, workers' comp claims. And so how do we do that? We compare the losses of a specific employer to all other companies in that same industry that are of a similar size. And so when we say industry, we're really kind of talking about classification. And when we say size, we're really talking about payroll. So we look at both of those things to compare the losses for a specific employer against other employers with those two factors. The last thing to keep in mind is experience rating is mandatory. So if you're an employer and you qualify for an experience modification, so you qualify for this experience rating system, it doesn't matter what insurer you get your policy from, you will be impacted by this experience rating factor or an XMOD. Every insurer is required to apply that experience modification, regardless of who they are. Different insurers can apply different debits and credits to your policy to impact your premium. But in terms of experience rating, it's consistent throughout any insurer that you would get a policy with. So this is all great. Let's talk a little bit about experience modifications because I think your audience really cares about what you call an EMR, but what we call at the WCIRB an experience modification or an XMOD. An XMOD is essentially expressed as a percentage, and it applies to your insurance policy. We use the data that we collect to calculate this percentage. Typically, this XMOD is effective for 1 year. There are some differences in how an XMOD is applied, but generally what your customers are going to see, the listeners are going to have is an XMOD that applies for generally 1 year. How do we calculate the XMOD? Well, we collect data from insurers and we use the data that is provided by insurers, which is audited. It's also verified by the WCIRB, and we use that data in the XMOD calculation. So all the data that we use in the calculation is being reported by the insurer or a third-party company, but it's all coming from the insurer based on audited information from workers' comp policies. Some people don't know this, but the data that we use in the calculation of an XMOD, it's coming from a 3-year period, and that 3-year period changes from XMOD to XMOD. So it rolls over. So it's always going to be a 3-year period, and it's always going to roll over for future XMODs. Lastly, this is really important. The XMOD is calculated using payroll by classification and losses by classification. So essentially, like really two important factors when it comes to XMOD calculation. I'm going to pause here really quick to just see if anybody has any questions or if I can provide any clarification on any of the things I've kind of discussed so far. Great. So we've talked about XMODs. We actually, as the WCIRB, do provide a document that shows how we actually calculate this XMOD. And you can see the image on the right. This is available on our website. This is what we call an experience rating worksheet. It's also called a rate sheet. The image on the right has a bunch of red bubbles with numbers. And on our website, if you actually go to and you type in experience rating worksheet or rate sheet, you'll see an example of this. It'll be the same example. You can actually click on the red bubbles, and there's a little pop-up that comes on that gives you an explanation as to what each of these sections represent. So it gives you a little bit more detail. I'm not going to go through each section for this presentation, but generally this is what a rate sheet example would look like. These worksheets are available to policyholders, insurers, agents, and brokers at no cost. So it's very easy to just go on our website, submit a request online, and to get a copy of a specific rate sheet. And since most of the listeners are probably employers, this would be something that they could access through our website. You could even call our contact center. Much easier to just go to the website and request this form. And it shows all of the inputs for the XMOD calculation. So there are different rate sheets for different XMODs. And so you could see exactly what data is being used in your XMOD calculation. What I really like is at the bottom of this rate sheet, which is kind of hard to see, but it's below the calculation. We provide something called a loss-free rating. And what that is essentially where your XMOD would be if you as the employer had 0 claims for this calculation period or your experience period. So that's kind of cool to see that if you didn't have any claims, what your XMOD could be. We feel like it's maybe like a little bit of an incentive for employers to hopefully motivate them to have a better workers' comp claim experience. So we do include that information on the rate sheet. So I'm going to get a little bit into the actual calculation. You can kind of see it on this page, but let me blow it up a little bit. On a very fundamental level, your XMOD calculation is a matter of comparing actual losses to expected losses. If your XMOD is 100%, it means your actual losses are equal to your expected losses. And what that generally means is that if you as an employer have a mod of 100%, you have similar experience to other sized companies in the same industry. If your actual losses are less than your expected losses, which means your numerator in the fraction is lower than your denominator, your XMOD is going to be less than 100%. And that generally means that an employer has better experience than other similar sized companies in the industry. And then of course, the reverse is true. If your actual losses are greater than your expected losses, your XMOD will be greater than 100. And that generally means that as an employer, you have worse experience than other similar sized companies in your industry. So let's actually get into what the actual losses are and what the expected losses are, because I think that's probably of interest to some of the people on the call. First of all, your actual losses are your paid costs and expected costs that are being paid by the insurer. So whatever the insurer has paid out for specific claims or what they expect to pay for a claim is considered an actual loss. And that's reported to the WCIRB by the insurer based on how they're valuing claims at the time they're supposed to report the claim to the WCIRB. Where do we get expected losses from, though? What that really is the projected losses for a specific business in an industry. And so that's calculated by us, the WCIRB. How do we calculate it? It's based on classification and payroll. So it should hopefully make sense to some of the people that the larger the business is, which means the higher the payroll, the more losses the business is expected to incur. And that's generally because if you have more payroll, you either have more workers or you have more higher paid workers. But generally, you can think of this as having more workers, which means more exposure to workers' comp risk. And therefore, likely you will have higher expected losses. But that's also very dependent on your classification because the classification has what we call an expected loss rate associated with it. Every classification has a different unique expected loss rate. So like I said, classification is used to calculate expected losses. An incorrect classification could result in lower expected losses, which if you think about the fraction, that means your denominator is going to be lower. So all else equal with the same level of actual losses, this would generally increase your mod. So it's important that you have the right classification so that you have the right expected losses. Payroll is used in both expected losses and actual losses. And you can see that in the rate sheet. Reported claim values are used in the actual loss calculation, which I mentioned in the last slide. And here's another little hiccup, very interesting point. Open claims include any paid costs as well as expected costs to be paid by the insurer in the future. And that should make sense because an open claim is going to have anything that the insurer has already paid, but also what they're reserving to pay for the claim in the future. And then also closed claims include only paid costs because there are no longer any expected costs to be paid by the insurer if the claim has been closed. So what does that mean for, some of the employers on this call? What can you do to ensure that you have the right experience modification? The first thing that you want to do to validate the payroll classes and losses used in your XMOD calculation is request a copy of your rate sheet from the WCIRB. It's free. It's very easy. Go onto our website, request a copy of your rate sheet, and then you can clearly see what policies are being used in the calculation. You can see your payroll and classification. You can see your losses. All that information is laid out for you. So request a copy of that rate sheet from the WCIRB. Another thing that you can do, check that your insurer is using the correct classification at the time of your premium audit. So when your insurer comes and does the premium audit, just validate that employees are being classified correctly, which also means that you're paying the correct rate for those employees. So every time you do a premium audit, just check with your insurer that they're using the right class for all the employees. If you have a specific question about your classification, maybe you disagree with your insurer about how an employee should be classified, call the WCIRB contact center, email us. Let us know if you have these questions. We're happy to assist in any way that we can, but give us a call. You can also request a classification inspection from the WCIRB through your insurer or your agent or broker. What is a classification inspection though? So essentially it's when the WCIRB comes out, we either do a virtual or a physical inspection of your operations, and we create a report, something called an inspection report, and we, in that report, indicate the different operations that apply to your business and what classifications should apply to each of those operations. And so that's a great way for your insurer also to have a document listing out what the correct classification codes are that apply to your business. The last thing is improve your workplace safety to reduce the occurrence of workers' comp claims. Your XMOD will be improved if you don't have any workers' comp claims, and generally, and that's because we do include that loss-free rating at the bottom of the XMOD, the experience rating worksheet. So if you can improve your workplace safety and reduce the occurrence of workers' comp claims, that will definitely help with your experience modification. So I'll turn this over to Vivek and Alok.
Thanks, Angela. That was perfect set up for my slide here, talking more about the presence of safety on site and what it is that, each of us can do to help lower our workman's comp cost and lower our EMR. And so a lot of the things we're going to talk about here is having a strong safety culture. And yeah, that's a big word and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But step one to me when you talk about having a strong culture is we're listening to our employees in the field. We're engaged with them when we're walking around on the job site, construction site, manufacturing floor, or in a conference room, or even in the break room, right? We're listening to our workers. We're talking to them about safety. And not only are we talking to them about safety, but we're also talking to them about safety when they're doing things right. What I tend to see in a lot of this industries is when we have employees doing things wrong, us as leaders will immediately go talk to that employee. But just as important is when our employees are doing things right, we do also need to talk to them and also continue to enforce what they're doing is the right thing to do. Yeah, and then treat near misses seriously. A lot of companies, when we have an incident that's severe in nature, absolutely no doubt, we're taking all the steps in doing a thorough root cause analysis of the incident. We do more inspections, audits, we conduct more training, we're trying to get to the root cause, we share that incident. But just as we share those incidents, when you see a company that has a strong safety culture, they tend to treat their near misses with the same intensity and not going, phew, that was a close call. And they continue to move and rock and roll and continue to do what they do. So, yeah, treat near misses seriously. They're a sign of things to come. Recognize safety voices. A lot of our employees that are out in the field, they see the things that are happening in the field. We as leaders cannot see all those things. And who sees all those things is our employees that are out in the field. They know where other employees are cutting corners. Who is the employee that's driving the fork truck a little bit too fast? Who's not honking the horn at the intersection or using the mirror? Or maybe moving a little bit too fast through the plant. And those are the kind of conversations, those are the things we want our employees to share with us before something bad happens. So continue to recognize those safety champions when they do share those things with us. And I would say is celebrate those accomplishments when our employees are doing exactly what we're asking them to do. And what we ask them to do is hey, when you see something unsafe, do something about it. Tell your supervisor. And when they do that, let's celebrate and fix hazards quickly. When we do have employees share with us what some of the hazards are in the field, take a, very quick, fast approach and fix them as soon as possible. And if you can't fix them as soon as possible, because it may take some time, some money, may need to do some engineering as to what it is, let's at least barricade the work area, prevent and eliminate the hazard by making sure our employees are not exposed to those hazards. And again, just like near misses, focus on your incidents. When you do have something happen, don't be in a culture where you do not share those incidents with other employees, other job sites. Share those incidents around the world. And because you know what, a lot of those same hazards exist at your other facilities also. So when you're open to sharing incidents and you're open to learning from other people's incidents, really shows a strong safety culture. And let me just add a couple other things too. As I look at this slide, also implement effective education where employees are learning, right? And I'm talking about not just employees on the field, but throughout the organization and not training necessarily, because to me, training sometimes it feels like it's a click in the box, a pencil whipping, same old boring annual training where our employees really aren't learning anything, right? It's more about educating and continuing to get better. And Angela talked about, managing your claims and doing everything you can, make sure it's accurate. But I would also say is, work with the local health clinic where your site is located that shares the same caring approach to managing injuries and understand your ability to provide work for restricted work for the employees and still not negatively impacting, employees' conditions. So continue to be proactive, do safety audits, talk to your employees, and all these things will help maintain a strong, positive safety culture and increase the chance of maintaining a lower EMR.
That's great. Thanks, Alok. And so Alok talked a lot about safety culture and the importance of that. A question might have is how do we actually implement best practices to achieve those results and see our EMR decline? So we're going to talk a little bit about what we do at Team Force AI before handing it back to Angela to go in more detail on things. So we're really here to kind of help take the theory behind things and put it into best practice behavior through what we call our system of proof. So the first thing we do is we help solve underreporting. One of the largest challenges we hear is workers find it challenging to report incidents and near misses. It's cumbersome. They're worried about retaliation. They're worried about production downtime. Maybe the culture doesn't support them speaking up. And so we've identified a way to create an anonymous, gamified, multilingual, voluntary, in the flow of work platform where we set up tablets near time clocks, break rooms, and restrooms. And we have one question a day related to safety, quality, execution risk, you name it. And people can go up and provide information to that based on that prompt or just unsolicited as commentary or feedback. When that information comes in, it's then triaged to different uh, folks within the organization, creating accountability. So on the back end, there's an owner that's assigned to actually follow through and act on the signals that came in through the workforce. And that's all documented. That documentation then allows supervisors, they could be everyone from EHS folks, operations, HR business partners, and more to be able to say, okay, here's documented proof around the actions people have taken. This is sort of our system of record around what's happening. But that documented system of record is usually provided by the employer. So say someone is coming in for an audit, someone who's in the HS department might say, here's the actions we took. That manager or supervisor might sign off on that. But when we think about EMR, we think about claims, we think about safety incidents, the people who are usually most at risk are our workers, the ones in the actual field or the ones in our manufacturing plants, whatever it may be, who are most at risk. And they have very little say traditionally on whether something has actually been fixed. We have this thing we call verified fixes or workforce attestation. So after a fix or a change has occurred, rather than waiting to see a downstream effect of lower incidents or accidents, whatever it may be, do we actually have confirmation from the workforce in real time that they've noticed this change actually occur, and they validate and verify and attest to it, and that demonstrates to them and to executive leadership and to regulators that, hey, we are actually following through on what we said we were doing. It's not just our word. The proof is coming directly from our workforce, and here's them responding to that prompt on the tablet or screen confirming that. And then the fifth thing is when you go through this whole process of actually, solving underreporting, having a proper accountability structure, actually putting in fixes, getting the proof of those, you now have a trail of audit readiness that you can say, listen, here's the proof of everything that we're doing. And that's what we call the system of proof. The way it's actually structured, it's not something that needs to be very lengthy. Within 30 days, we have proven time and time again that we can help resolve certain metrics that you see here, notably around safety, insurance costs, and more. And as Angela's talking about with the XMOD or the EMR, is the downstream effect of that is it affects your P&L. And we know many of you, while you want to do right by your workers, you ultimately have a fiduciary responsibility to be thinking about how do you benefit the business as a whole, the P&L, the top line, the bottom line. And so the whole point of this exercise is to ultimately flow back into reducing those costs for you. We're going to pass it back to Angela, and she's going to talk about a really interesting component related to safety. Angela, go ahead.
Hey, Angela, your volume is off.
Can you guys hear me now? I was muting myself to be, more respectful of other people's presentations. And of course, I forgot to unmute myself.
We've all done that.
So I was saying that I want to talk a little bit about claim frequency versus claim severity. One of the things that as a WCIRB we do recognize is that, first of all, there is a difference between claim frequency and claim severity. And an employer generally does not have control over how a claim develops. And as a result, they can't always control the severity of the claim. So if somebody falls off a ladder and they break their arm versus they fall off a ladder and they hit their head, the fact that they hit their head versus broke their arm is going to change the severity of the claim generally. So we recognize that an employer really doesn't have much control over how the claim develops. We say that an employer can't always control the severity of the claim because maybe there are factors that are in place about safety at the workplace. So one of the things that we do recognize is that generally an employer has control over workplace safety and therefore whether a claim occurs at all. So whether the claim happens is a factor in the claim frequency. I know that you guys have talked a lot about safety and kind of recognizing what are some good safety, things to consider. But again, in terms of experience modification, an employer we understand generally has more control over claim frequency and claim severity. And that actually gets factored into the experience modification calculation. So the XMOD calculation does put more emphasis on claim frequency than claim severity. And that's the way in which we limit how much of the claim is being factored into the experience modification calculation. So what we consider to be actual losses included in the calculation. And how much of what we include in terms of the actual losses is very dependent on the size of the employer. So what does that mean? The larger the employer, the higher the amount of actual losses that are included in the calculation. And then, of course, the reverse is also true. The smaller the employer, the lower the amount of actual losses are included in the calculation. So again, this is dependent on the employer size. So we do take that into consideration. I'm going to give a little bit of tidbits about XMODs, which some of your listeners may not know. First, a claim is typically included in the XMOD calculation for about 3 years or for about 3 XMODs. Because remember, I said most XMODs do apply for about a year. So eventually that claim will, what we say, fall off, particularly because we do use a 3-year rolling period when we talk about data that's being included in the XMOD calculation. Another thing that should be helpful to some of your smaller employers, if you're an employer and you have one claim that is reported during the 3-year rolling period that we use in the XMOD calculation, the difference between your loss-free rating, which is the rating that you would have had if you had 0 claims, so the difference between that loss-free rating and what your mod is being calculated as, if that difference is more than 25%, we cap it at 25%. Again, we recognize that employers have less control over claim severity, but they do have control over claim frequency. And so if you have a very severe claim, it's possible that your XMOD might increase by more than 25%. And so we don't want to inadvertently penalize employers for that. And so we do cap the increase in the XMOD to 25%. Again, if there's only one claim in that 3-year experience period. One more thing. A couple years ago, we really wanted to encourage more reporting of first aid claims. From a data perspective, this is really important. We want to do more research about first aid claims, perhaps maybe around the frequency or severity of those first aid claims, maybe what industries, because we're a data organization. So to help encourage the reporting of those first aid claims, we have removed the first $250 of every claim from the XMOD calculation. So that means if you have a claim that is under 250, that claim is not going to be included in the XMOD calculation at all. If you have a claim that's over 250, we remove that first $250 of the claim from the XMOD calculation, and we only consider the rest of the claim value when it comes to calculating the XMOD. So please report all your workers' comp claims, even if they're first aid claims. Just a couple resources really quick. All of this can be found on our website. If you go to WCIRB.com, at the top, there's a ribbon, click on research and education, and then go down to online guide to workers' compensation. This is a great resource if you have questions about classification or experience rating. We have a lot of information there. I really encourage people to go and just familiarize yourself with some of these workers' comp concepts. We have a page on the experience rating system as a whole. Also, like what exactly is the experience period? That's that 3-year rolling period that we use for data when we calculate the experience modification. We have a page on experience mods, the experience rating formula. If you have questions on exactly how we calculate the experience mod, please go to our experience rating formula. We've got information there about how it's actually calculated. I mentioned in the very beginning, you can request a copy of your experience rating worksheet or your rate sheet. So we have a link there that you can click on and request that rate sheet. And I also mentioned that if you do have disputes with your insurer about the right classification that applies to your operations, we as the WCIRB can come out and do something called a classification inspection. And so we have a page with information about how those inspections work and how you can get your agent or broker or your insurer to submit a request for us to come out and do the inspection. And then I'm going to do a little plug for the WCIRB because I have to and because I work there and it's awesome. If you do have any feedback on the slides or on this presentation, or if you have any questions, feel free to scan the QR code and provide your feedback. We always love to hear any feedback in any way that we can improve our presentations, or maybe some additional content that we should be adding to the slides. And that's all I have to share.
I think we have a question in the chat, Angela.
All right. Let's see. So Dibash, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, and I'm sure I'm not, so I do apologize. I'm not quite sure what your question is asking, but I will say that for different sized employers, we include a different amount of the claim in the mod calculation. So generally, the larger you are as an employer, the more of the claim is getting included in the mod calculation. And that's part of your actual loss calculation. So it's kind of hard for me to answer your question about kind of thresholds. It's highly dependent on the size of the employer.
And Dibash, feel free to clarify. I'll just read it out loud for the recording. It's when does the max hit 0.321 on the mod occur for a claim occur once the expense crosses 60K? Second is what is the range before that 250K, 250 to 60K?
It is 250 is the minimum. I'm not quite sure what the maximum is. So yeah, it'll just be dependent on how large the employer is.
Angela, is there opportunity for the participants to also reach out to you afterwards if they had some more specific questions or it comes to them at a later time?
Yeah, absolutely. You can contact me. I would encourage you to reach out to our contact center. They have a lot of information about all the different facets of the WCIRB, and that's their main role as well. So you can call or email. And then I would say that if for some reason you need to reach out to me, please feel free. I'm happy to provide more information. I just want to give a plug to our contact center because they're great.
Thanks. Thanks. Hey, Angela, I did have a question for you though. So let me give you an example here. So I got a construction company, about 400 employees, we'll say, and 25% of them are basically office support. And then another good percentage of them, yes, they do visit the job sites, but they're not conducting any hands-on work itself, right? It could be like a project manager that basically, comes and joins a meeting in the trailer on a construction site, or maybe he or she does walk the job site, but is there an opportunity for employers to take advantage of that and to lower their EMR rate because a good percentage of their employees basically have very little risk?
So your first point about, I would call them clerical workers, people who are, really in the office doing office type work. Our clerical code is extremely strict, and it's extremely strict for a reason. Those people who qualify for either 8810, which is our clerical office employees code, or our 8871, which is our clerical telecommuters code, those employees need to be not 95, not 98, not 99.2, 100% office clerical work. They can't travel in connection with their job duties. They can't walk job sites. They can't do any hands-on operations. They need to be 100% clerical. We do have another code for it's called, the phraseology is outside sales, but it's essentially anybody who's kind of clerical travels in connection with their job duties. So generally these are salespeople. We have classification 8742. Again, that one is also very strict. You cannot be engaged in any hands-on operations. Um, I know that construction is kind of different because there's different levels of supervision. So you've got your laborers, you've got your superintendents, you've got your project managers. And so we do have some specific classifications for those types of jobs in the construction industry that maybe we don't have in other industries just because of the nature of construction. So it really depends on kind of what the purpose of their job duties are at the job site. And I'm not going to make any recommendations, but if I were to make any recommendations, I would say try to keep your clerical people 100% clerical, and only the people that absolutely need to travel to the job site for whatever reason, then have those people go to the job site, but they're not going to qualify for the clerical code, either the clerical or the clerical telecommuting code. Because even walking the job site, what if the person trips and falls? What if on the way to the job site, they get into a car accident? These are risks that you can't control versus somebody who's in a clerical setting. You just have different types of workers' comp claims that could be reported, and different types of safety issues that they would be subject to, maybe more carpal tunnel and things related to that nature.
Okay, great. Looks like we got some other comments that came up on the chat.
Yeah, well, from Dan Kohler. Thanks, Dan. So what is financial liability to companies for grossly understating their incident forecast or other claim projections?
If I can provide a little bit of feedback, but I'm not really sure this is completely up my alley. I would say that from a workers' comp perspective, when it comes to your workers' comp policy, and maybe this isn't really understating their incident forecast, but if when you get your policy with your insurer, you are underestimating your payroll, or you have the wrong classification associated with your policy, your premium is going to be dependent on those numbers. So when it comes to premium audit and the insurer does an adjustment, if you have underestimated your payroll, you will likely owe more money at the end of your policy as an adjustment for the premium, because the premium audit includes actual payroll, not estimated payroll. And in terms of claim projections, that's probably something that's more on the insurer side when it comes to them reserving money for claims. So
Is there any kind of penalty, Angela, besides the mismatch between what you were describing? Like, uh, have you seen any incidents where companies have gotten in trouble for things like
yes,
that? Okay.
from the perspective of one, you should always ensure that you have the right classification because there can be penalties and I can't really speak on just because I don't have the experiences as to the depth of that. But there are consequences if you are um, purposefully not reporting your operations correctly to your insurer and therefore not using the right classification. And generally, the employers who do that, and there's very few in the workers' comp ecosystem, but if they were to do that, it's probably because they want a classification with a lower rate. This is why we highly encourage employers to just make sure that you have the right classification, that the insurer is using the right classification, that your agent or broker knows what you do, and that they're communicating that effectively to the insurer, just to make sure that everything is being accurately reported. So even the point about, I think another comment was getting your broker to work with your carrier to adjust class codes. It's really just about having the correct classification code because not only does it impact, how an insurer reserves the amount for expected losses, it impacts everything on experience rating, including the actual and expected losses. So all of that gets filtered in. It's really important to make sure you have the right classification associated with your operations.
Great. Any other questions from our audience? Let's see another comment. Okay, Andrew, if you want to react to some carriers will just handle misclassifications at audit, thus adding premium. There's some that will non-renew your policy.
Yeah, I can't speak on what insurer practices are, but again, I would just make sure that the time that you get your policy, make sure that the insurer is using the right classification. And again, if you have disputes or questions, feel free to reach out to the WCIRB. You can request a classification inspection. We will publish an inspection report, and that report will be available to the insurer. So then there really shouldn't be any confusion about what classification applies to your operations between you and the insurer once that report is published.
And if we've got people who are not based in California, is this something that's available in every US state?
So, as far as I know, every state has some kind of entity that oversees workers' comp data. Some states have their own bureaus, like we do in California. Some states have sort of a multi state bureau that oversees their workers' comp data. But I believe that most, if not all, state bureaus should have some kind of system like we do, where there is experience rating, there is a standard class system. There are classification inspections that are performed. They may call them different things or they may handle the calculations slightly differently. But as far as I know, most, if not all, state bureaus are going to operate very similarly to the WCIRB from those perspectives.
Right. Any other questions from our audience or hello, do you have any other? Well, great. Thank you everyone so much for your time and appreciate you very much, Angela and Alok for making this happen. And we'll be sharing information and yeah, hope this was helpful.
Yeah, hey Vivek, just one thought. As I kind of just listened to, sorry, I was hoping there would be some more questions, but just kind of thinking about summarizing at the end of the day, if I'm sitting there as an employer, right? Why do I want to lower my EMR? And I just kind of four bullet points here as Angela was speaking, right? Number one is obviously lower my insurance premiums. This indicates, I have a lower risk, therefore saving business significant money over time. Number two is my reputation. A low EMR reflects a company's commitment to safety because when that EMR is a little bit higher or it doesn't meet the customer's qualifications, as a safety professional, as an operational leader, I've had to go in there and try to justify and explain to them certain incidents and why we are still a very safe company and still should have the opportunity to bid on this job. So I would just say is number three is increased business opportunities. Many clients and government agencies prefer to work with companies that maintain a lower EMR because at the end of the day, it can only also impact their reputation, when there is an incident. And then number four, what you and I talk about all the time is just improving our safety culture. Low EMR is an indicator of a strong safety culture, or it could be. And when it is not only is it the right thing to do, but can lead to fewer incidents and then also less of our employees getting hurt. So just four bullets I made as Angela was talking.
Jess, your question, coming from a startup with limited resources, how can we utilize this info to inform finance teams to invest in safety? And I'll let Alok take that, but I'll just add one point on that, which is I was talking off the record with someone, a board member to Fortune 500, and I was asking him about safety, your point exactly on whether it was something he genuinely cared about. And he said, Vivek, and this company has some OSHA inspections, and some of those become violations. And so said, cost of doing business doesn't really, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't really care that much. It's sad, but truthful. I said, well, what do you care about? And he said, well, I care more about my workers' comp and my insurance premiums because that ultimately affects P&L. And I said, you do realize, if you have more claims, if you have safety issues, that ultimately does affect those things. Yeah, okay, I can see that connection. But I said, is there anything more that matters to you than even that? And he said, well, if we have too many violations, especially in construction, but even in different industries, clients will ask us or prospects will ask us when we're bidding how many of those we have. And if we have too many, sometimes they won't even let us bid on projects. And that scares us the most because that hurts our revenue, our top line, our growth. And so sometimes, like when I think about trying to connect what we're doing to different departments, like finance, it's all about relating it in terms they understand. Whether they care about safety or they don't. If they care about P&L and their mandate is to improve that, tying everything back into how it flows into that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that point, Alok.
No, that's perfect, Vic. Yeah, I think you got to speak their language, right? If you are talking to the CFO or even a boss that truly is looking at P&L, is again tying things back to what the dollar cost is associated with if something was to happen. Also increased business opportunities, right? Lower EMR rate allows me to be able to bid on customers that have high expectations when it comes to safety, but also usually good paying customers, a lot of visibility, the importance of those jobs too. So I think it would, definitely lead some of these smaller companies to bigger and greater things. And then also, when we looked at that slide, when we talked about some of the activities that leaders could do, and there's really minimal cost associated with doing those activities, right? When you're out in the field, when you're looking at productivity, schedule, cost, order and parts, also at the same time when you're out there, you know what? Take a look at safety. Take a look at having that 30-second, 1 minute conversation with your employees. So some of the activities that we talked about, come with minimal cost associated with it. The training, the education piece is probably the biggest one, but I would say is probably one of the most important ones too.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Look forward to following up.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.